This is the fourth video in the series for Education 150, creating the Excel gradebook. And this is going to go over what are probably the toughest skills that kind of catch people on the quiz. And that is we're going to be doing the mirror formula by pulling stuff into our total sheet. And we're going to be doing absolute cell reference. So here we go. Let's start by doing that mirror formula. We have some nice data on our three worksheets, homework, tests, and quizzes. We've got totals and averages for all of those, and they're looking good. Now, I want to see the grand total that my students are getting for this unit so that I can assign them a grade. So in order to do that, I'm going to first label what assignments I'm looking for my total grade. I'm just going to do the same order as I have for my sheets. Quizzes, I just tabbed over for tests, and in this one, I'm just going to do homework. Now, I don't want to have to recreate the data, and in fact, I want it to be all linked, so in case I change something on one of these sheets, it'll actually reflect the changes on this one. So I don't just want to type in final numbers. In order to do that, I'm going to use that mirror formula, which means I want this cell, and actually all of these, to reflect what's on the quizzes sheet, just the totals on the quizzes sheet. That mirror formula is really easy. You just put in the equals, but then you have to tell it what you want it to be equal to. So at this point, instead of entering cell data or any kind of mathematical operator, just move your cursor down to the quizzes sheet and just be careful where you click. Because on the quizzes sheet, I only want this information about the totals. And since I started in the points possible area, that's where I'm going to start here. I'm only clicking on one cell because I can fill it in later on in the total sheet. I just click on one cell, I hit enter. It will automatically flip me back to the total sheet, at which point I can go back to that top cell that I've copied over, and if I autofill it down now, it will pull the rest of the data from that quizzes sheet. And remember, you are pulling onto the total sheet. I'm not starting on the quizzes sheet, so always start on the total sheet. I'm going to do the exact same thing for tests and homework. So for tests, I'm going to start where I want the points possible for the tests to appear, just equal, move my cursor down to tests, look for the totals for tests, which is here, one cell, and hit enter. It'll flip me back to my total sheet. I return to that area, make that autofill handle, and copy it down. And then same procedure for homework. Click up here, type in that equals, move to the homework sheet, get the totals for homework, and hit enter. Return to that original cell and autofill it down so it copies the rest of the data. That's looking good. Now, just so I don't get confused between what are points possible and what's student data, I'm going to take off the shading here. So I'm going to go up to my bucket and just put no fill for that. That looks better. Now, in the last video, you learned how to make the functions for total and averages. So I'll just do that really quickly. Click where you want the answer to end up. Auto sum. Excel guessed correctly that I wanted to add those three. I hit enter. Use my autofill handle to copy that down. And then for averages, remember that you do need to actually type in equals average, open parentheses, grab the average, and hit enter to finish that formula off, and move that over. I'm going to do that fancy border here in this final corner just so people aren't confused about what's going there. I did my borders button, 2 corners, click OK, and now it looks all filled out. All right, so that is looking pretty good. Now, I know what my students have as a total, which is here. For example, the student Anderson has a total of 180 points out of a possible 195. Now, unless I want to sit there and really think about it, I'm not going to be able to translate, though, that into a percent or eventually a letter grade. I don't know whether Anderson looks pretty good, but I can't tell whether they got A minus, B plus. So I'm going to convert this into a percent that I can then translate into A, B, C, D. In order to do that, I'm going to make a new column. I'm going to call it percent, or you could call it final grade. And I'm going to calculate it right here. I don't need to have anything here because I've already got the points possible right here waiting for me. But I do need to make a mathematical formula. So I'm going to start with equals. And just as if you were going to divide 8 out of 10 on a quiz, you take the number of points that the student earned, and front slash is going to be our division symbol, and you divide it by the number of total possible points that they got. And in this case, it's for the unit. So there were 195 points possible. This student got 180. So I do this division formula. When it looks right, I'm going to hit enter. And it looks like Anderson got 92%. So I'm going to click on that. And just to make a nice percent instead of a decimal, I will go up to my formatting the number area and put on percent style. Oh, that looks great. Now I know that Anderson got an A minus. Super. I'm going to do that for the rest of them. Get my autofill handle, drag it down. Now hold the phone. This is not looking good anymore because I can't believe that Elizondo has got a grade of 110% when I know that he only got 123 out of his test. So something is clearly wrong with my formula. Well, let me take a look at what my formula is. If I click on this cell, I can reveal the formula up in the formula bar here. It says G13, okay, that's his total possible points, over G12, that's D'Agostino's possible points. That makes no sense. But I actually did what Excel told me to do, which was take the cell to the left of the original formula and divide it by the one up on top of it. Now, that's not what I wanted. What I wanted, but what Excel can't read my mind, is that I always want to divide whatever they got by this number. This is going to be a constant or an absolute reference. So I need to indicate that in my formula. In order to remind me that this is a constant, I'm going to actually change the font color to red, just so you can remember that this number always needs to stay the same. Now, I'm going to delete these formulas because they are wrong. Now, I could do the cheating method, and I could make my formula equals G9 over 195. However, if I went back to one of my other sheets and eventually changed or added a quiz or a test or some homework or took one out, this number may be different, but in the formula it would still be 195. So I don't want to do that. I want to use a cell reference. I just have to change the cell reference to always point here, even when I autofill the formula down. So I'm going to move up and click on that cell reference, which is G8. Okay, so I can see here in my formula it's G8. And I'm going to hit the F4 button on my computer in order to turn it into an absolute reference. And absolute reference is indicated by a dollar sign before the column and a dollar sign before the row. If you don't want to use the F4 button, the other option would be to just click your cursor and enter the dollar symbol, which is above the 4 here, and manually the dollar symbol here. As long as you do it before the column and the row, you're fine. So you can either do it manually or use that F4 button. All right, that looks better. Now I'm going to hit enter to lock that change in. And let's see what happens if I fill that down. Aha, this looks better. And I'm going to check that last formula just to make sure. That's right. It's taking Elizondo's final grade and still dividing it by this cell, G8. So that is looking really good. Now, that's one reason that you might want to use an absolute cell reference. There's another one, and that is to add the scale like the way that I showed you in class. So I'm going to go over and add a scale to, let's say, the quizzes. So Quiz 3 grades were a little bit low. And I think I'm going to add a little bit more just to kind of get everybody's quiz grades up a bit. So I'm going to insert a column. You're pretty good at that by now, hopefully. I'm going to right click on this column header and say insert. And in this area here, I'm going to add a scale. Now I don't want to put my scale here. In fact, I'm even going to block that off just to remind everybody that I don't want to put my scale there, because if I do, it will be added into my totals. I don't want to add anything into my totals. I want to keep that at 30. I'm going to actually put my scale right above it. And I'm going to scale their quizzes by 10%. Right, so I'm just going to put 0.1. I'm going to add 10% onto everybody's quiz 3 to kind of help them bump up, because maybe the quiz was not as fair as I wanted. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to take whatever they got and multiply it times 10%, and that will eventually get added in with everything else. So I'm going to go down here, start with my equals. I'm going to say whatever Anderson got, I'm going to use that asterisk above the 8 to indicate multiplication, and I'm going to multiply it times this. Now, before I go any further, can you sort of see that it's by itself up here, and this is going to have to be an absolute cell reference, so that when I copy these down, it will always point back to, in my formula, the 10%. It'll adjust for the quiz 3 grade, but it'll always look back here. So before I even hit enter on this, I'm just going to do F4, change that into an absolute reference, and then hit enter. Now when I go back and copy it down, it looks reasonable, and if I look at it, I can just tell because I know it's 10% that these numbers are correct. I'm actually going to go through and make that red just to remind myself that that is the cell reference. Now I want to adjust my sum formula because I want to make sure that this is included in my sum formula so they get those extra points. So I'm going to go back and just redo my sum to include the G column now because that wasn't included. You can see that now it's added up there. And I'm going to just copy that down. So don't forget to readjust your sum formula if you need to. Okay, and that was scale with absolute reference.